Android Repair Training. Introduction. Welcome to day 1 of your Android repair journey. Before we pick up a screwdriver, before we connect flashing tools, and before we start repairing smartphones, there is something very important we need to understand first. We need to understand how Android actually works inside a phone. Let me ask you a quick question. Have you ever wondered why some phones get stuck on the logo? Or why some phones restart again and again? Or why some apps suddenly stop working? Many beginners think Android is just one big program. But in reality, Android is built in layers. And the best way to understand these layers is to imagine a high-rise building. So today, imagine that your smartphone is a tall, modern building. Every floor in this building has a different responsibility. Every floor has a different function. And when something goes wrong, the problem usually happens on one specific floor. Now here is a question for you. If the electricity stops working in a building, do you blame the apartment on the top floor? Or do you check the electrical system in the building? Exactly. The problem is usually in the system, not the apartment. The same idea applies to Android smartphones. Android building layers. At the very bottom of our building, we have the foundation. The foundation is what supports the entire building. Without the foundation, the building would collapse. In Android, this foundation is called the Linux kernel. Now remember this name carefully, because the Linux kernel is one of the most important parts of Android. Above the foundation, we have the mechanical systems of the building. These include things like electrical wiring, plumbing pipes, ventilation systems. These systems allow the building to function properly. In Android, this layer is called the hardware abstraction layer, or simply HAL. Moving higher in the building, we find the management offices. These offices control the daily operations of the building. They manage rooms, they manage services, they control access. In Android, this level is called the application framework. Finally, at the very top of the building, we have the apartments. This is where people actually live and interact with the building. In Android, these apartments are the apps you use every day. WhatsApp, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Now here is another question for you. If WhatsApp crashes, does that mean the whole Android system is broken? Usually no. It only means the problem is in the app layer. This is why understanding Android layers is very important for technicians. Layer 1, Linux kernel. Now let's start from the very bottom of Android. This layer is called the Linux kernel. The Linux kernel is the core engine of the operating system. It communicates directly with the phone's hardware. Let's think about the hardware inside a phone. What components do you think are inside a smartphone? Take a moment and think. Here are some of them: the processor, the RAM, the battery, the screen, the camera, the storage memory. All these components must communicate with the Android system. But apps cannot talk to them directly. Instead, the Linux kernel acts as the middle controller. For example, when you open the camera app, the app sends a request. But the request goes to the kernel first. Then the kernel tells the camera hardware what to do. The same process happens when your phone charges the battery, your phone connects to Wi-Fi, your phone uses Bluetooth, your screen detects touch. All these actions are controlled at the kernel level. Here's another question. If the kernel becomes damaged, what do you think will happen to the phone? Correct. The phone may fail to boot, freeze during startup, restart continuously. These are problems technicians often call boot issues. Repairing these problems may require tools such as fastboot, ADB, flashing tools. Layer 2, Hardware Abstraction Layer, HAL. Now let's move one layer above the kernel. This layer is called the Hardware Abstraction Layer, or HAL. To understand HAL, imagine something simple. Imagine you travel to another country. Different countries have different power sockets. But if you have a universal power adapter, you can still plug in your charger. That adapter makes everything compatible. HAL works exactly like that adapter. Smartphones use many different hardware brands. For example, cameras can come from Sony, Samsung, OmniVision. But Android apps should work the same way on every phone. So HAL acts like a translator. It translates Android commands into instructions that specific hardware understands. For example, an app simply says, "Open the camera." But HAL translates that command for the actual camera hardware. Without HAL, every smartphone would need a completely different Android system. From a repair perspective, HAL problems can cause issues like camera not working in some apps, fingerprint sensor failure, audio problems, sensor problems. Sometimes the hardware is not broken. The problem is software drivers inside HAL. This is why reflashing firmware often fixes these problems. Layer 3, Application Framework. Now we move higher in the Android building. This level is called the Application Framework. Think of this layer as the building manager. The manager organizes everything happening inside the building. The application framework controls things like notifications, windows, on the screen, app activities, installed applications. For example, when you receive a WhatsApp message notification, the framework decides how that notification appears. It also decides which apps are allowed to run in the background. This layer also finds Android Runtime, also called ART. This is the engine that runs Android applications. Apps are written in programming languages like Java, Docker, Kotlin, Dart. But the phone must convert them into a format it understands. This creates files called DEX files. ART processes these files and runs the apps. Back to, sometimes, after an Android update, phones feel slow. This happens because ART is optimizing applications again. During this time, the system is recompiling apps to make them run faster later. Pause. Android partitions. Now let's talk about where Android stores everything. Inside every smartphone, the internal memory is divided into sections called partitions. App activities. You can think of partitions as different rooms in our building. Each room has a special purpose. The first important partition is the strong system partition. This partition contains the Android operating system. It holds the core files needed for the phone to run. This partition is usually read-only, meaning users cannot easily change it. The next partition is the data partition. This is where your personal information is stored. For example, installed apps, settings, photos, videos, messages. When you perform a factory reset, the phone clears only this partition. Another important partition is recovery. Recovery mode is like an emergency repair room. If the phone fails to start normally, recovery mode can help fix it. From recovery mode, you can wipe data, install updates, and repair the system. Finally, we have the boot partition. This partition contains the kernel and startup instructions. It tells the phone how to start Android. Technician thinking. Now that you understand Android structure, you can begin thinking like a professional technician. Whenever a phone has a problem, ask yourself which layer of the system is causing the problem. For example, if a phone is stuck on the logo, the problem might be in the system or boot partition. If apps keep crashing, the problem might be in data partition. If hardware is not responding, the issue might be in HAL drivers. Understanding these layers will make your repair work much easier and faster. In the next lesson, we will move from theory to practice. We will install important Android repair tools on your computer. Tools like ADB, Fastboot, professional flashing tools. These tools allow technicians to communicate with Android devices directly. And this is where your real Android repair journey begins. Thank you for learning with me today. and I will see you in the next lesson.